Imagine doing your job, whatever it is, with a different team every 45 days. You have to keep growing, you have to keep accomplishing the outcome, but you start over completely.
I am so excited for this session. Also, can I say, Kat, it's so good to see you in 3D
Yeah, you
after so many
too.
conversations on Clubhouse. So thank you for accepting this invitation. Hi, everybody. Again, today we have Kat Cole with us. Kat is the COO and president of Focus Brands, a company that needs no introduction. Kat, obviously, I can be happy to introduce you. You have an amazing life story, but I would love it if you would introduce yourself. And usually, I would say to our guests, introduce yourself quickly, but with you, I want you to take your time because your story is so incredible. So please introduce yourself.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. So good to hang with you. I'm a several years back huge fan of Village Global and Eric and all of these things. It's been really cool to see Be on Deck and the whole program that's building. And I'm excited to see what you all do after. So I will follow each of you if I can get a list and stay close. So my story is today I run a company that does, depending on the year, because we have a lot of licensing and franchising, between 4.5 and 5 billion in global product sales. It's mostly restaurant brands, but they show up in all channels, truly omni-channel, grocery, convenience and fuel. Our brands are brands like Auntie Anne's and Cinnabon and Jamba, and you can look up the rest, but there are 7 brands. The company's tripled in size since I've been there. My role is I lead the presidents of the company. So the presidents of each of the brands and businesses report to me, and then I sit on the executive team of the parent company, and we make decisions on what companies to buy and what resources to invest in and what leaders to choose to develop from within or hire from outside to be executives across the portfolio of companies. And so that's the role today. In 60 countries, 7 brands, 7,000 brick and mortar locations, 100,000 points of retail distribution. So those are kind of like the by the numbers. Before that, I was president of Cinnabon in 2010, from 2010 to 2014, turned the business around out of the recession, which included restructuring the unit level economics of the existing business, growing a nascent business called licensing, where we have partnerships and alliances with some of the largest manufacturers and CPG companies in the world, like Cinnabon products with Pillsbury in grocery stores, and Cinnabon coffee creamer with International Delight and Kellogg's, and then launching a product in Burger King, so in wholesale food service as well as in packaged goods. And that became a business case study in many business schools of transforming a legacy business by way of launching and growing innovation businesses in a way that actually fed the whole ecosystem. So one didn't happen at the cost of the other or because the other wasn't performing well. The entire ecosystem of the brand grew because of the approach we took to omni-channel or multi-channel product and partnership throughout our branded portfolio, starting with Cinnabon, then Carvel, then Auntie Anne's. And now we apply it to most of our brands, this multi-channel mindset. Not all brands have the permission to go into these various channels based on the products they sell and what the brand stands for and how easily that brand deconstructs and how differentiated it is relative to competition. So I literally started the restaurant industry's first ever multi-channel licensing group inside of a company. Most people would use an agency and say, hey, we have a TGI Fridays, we have a restaurant and we're really famous for our fries. So go partner with a fry manufacturer and put some fries in grocery stores. It was always like a side occasional marketing activity for these brands. We made it a highly profitable 80% EBITDA margin, brand building and business building enterprise within the company, and then a part of a strategic way we bring brands, most of our brands, to market. So built that team from ground up and got it stable and growing, hired a successor again to take over my role after I had just done the same thing in Cinnabon, and have been the president and COO of the parent company since. Since I joined, we bought Auntie Anne's, McAllister's, and Jamba. and I'm restructuring the company right now to go buy far more brands, probably one a year, and then I'll wrap up my tenure eventually at Focus Brands because I've been there for 10 years and I'm ready to move on to the next chapter. Prior to that, I worked at Hooters restaurants for almost 15 years. I started out as a hostess at 17, Hooters girl at 18, first person in my family to get into college, and then started opening up franchises around the world when I was 19 years old. So I would travel to a country as a part of the team, and then very quickly leading the teams with a team of people who I'd never met. And we had to organize around a common goal to launch a brand, Hooters, and train a franchisee and hire and train the initial staff and set up the supply chain, get the restaurant construction complete, and then market the business, get it open and running, and then we would leave. And I started doing that repeatedly, country after country. And it was fun and I loved it and I was very good at it, leading these teams, again, by the time I was 20 years old. And before I knew it, I was failing college because I was traveling so much around the world launching franchises. And so my dreams of pursuing my degree, which at the time was computer sciences and electrical engineering, and then going on to law school, those dreams sort of fizzled away because I was having so much fun opening franchises around the world and I was better at it with less effort than many other people. And usually when you find that groove, it's some indication of what your magic or your purpose is. And so I just leaned into that. And Hooters hired me for a corporate job when I was 20 years old. So I had already dropped out of college, moved to Atlanta, and oversaw the corporate training department for the company at the time was doing about 350 million a year in sales. And by the time I was 26, we were at almost 800 million in sales. I became vice president at the age of 26. Led the company's hypergrowth around the world. We were fully vertically integrated. So I ran supply chain, our own marketing company, our own advertising agency, we had an airline. So I've officially started, operated, and then successfully shut down, thank goodness, an airline. Hooters Air, it was a thing. Google it, you'll laugh. It was a really stupid thing to do, but we were privately held and the CEO wanted to do it. So if I wanted to work there, I had to run it. And so I did. And learned a lot. Along that journey of working at Hooters, several other things happened. I started leading nonprofit organizations. So I was the chair of the board of the Georgia Restaurant Association. I was on the education committee for the National Restaurant Association. And so I did a lot of volunteer leadership roles for the industry that not only built insane amounts of connections throughout the industry that I would not have otherwise had. It built a reputation for being a leader, regardless of the company or the group. And it also built my leadership muscle faster than most people because most people have a job and then they learn from that and then it's sort of linear. But I had 3 leadership lives. I had my humanitarian leadership work that I had on the side. I had my nonprofit industry leadership roles with people I'm not paying. So learning to lead people who you don't pay is a very interesting exercise. And then I had my actual day gig of being an executive at a for-profit company. And so as a result, the ability to lead and build trust and influence and understand how to set a vision and organize people around that vision and have priorities driven by limited resources became quite easy for me at a very young age. And so I just, as the company grew, I grew. Eventually, we had to sell Hooters into private equity because the CEO died, and I navigated a lot of leadership change. And then that led to now bridging to where I started, moving from Hooters to Cinnabon. Over the last 8 years, I've done a lot of angel investing and seed and pre-seed stage companies, mostly consumer, a little bit of B2B if one of the B's is my expertise, but mostly consumer products, consumer brands, some DTC, some omni-channel, and have advised founders at various stages in their journey, from COOs of huge companies that are, have raised hundreds of millions of dollars to founders and leadership teams of earlier stage companies. And I'm a mom of 2 babies, 3 and 1. And have an amazing husband who's a badass who rode across the Atlantic Ocean and is also in venture capital here in Atlanta. So that's the whole story in sound bites and headlines.
That's amazing. Thank you, Kat, for sharing that. So, I mean, there's many ways in which I could have taken this conversation. I have a lot of things that I want to ask you about, and we'll talk about some leadership lessons. We'll talk about some of the ways that you continuously learn and unlearn things, which I'm fascinated about your ability to do that. And we'll talk a little bit about what you just mentioned about how you built like incredible partnerships that allowed you to take the brands to another level, and your passion for brands, etc. So please, people in the audience, feel free to post your questions on the Slack. I will pick them up and ask them to Kat. Let's make this as interactive as possible. And my first question to you, Kat, is then I think that your superpower, I mean, something I admire you for a lot, is your ability to kind of reframe things for yourself. And so my first question is, how did you learn that? When did that start? And kind of how do you keep, as I said, learning and unlearning things?
I love this question. I think a little bit of it is I've always been a pattern finder. Puzzles were very easy for me in the early years. Everything in my mind from an early age, so it's a little bit nature and then a little bit nurture. I see the commonality in things. If you could give me a list of 40 words, and I can build a bridge between any of those words in any sequence. I just believe there is connection and commonality. Even if it is two things have a shared enemy, right? Or two things have a common anti-ethos, but I just see the connectivity between things. So a little bit of it is natural, just a style of the way my brain works, I think. But the nurture part, the part that can be learned, the experiential piece of helping me think in frameworks and reframing things, was because I was plopped in countries over and over where I knew no one and had to lead a team that I had never met before and build trust in a matter of hours in order to get a common goal achieved over and over. So I always challenge people and say, imagine doing your job, whatever it is, with a different team every 45 days. You have to keep growing. You have to keep accomplishing the outcome, but you start over completely with the team. And that experience taught me a lot. It was a brutal leadership mirror, brutal, because if there was something commonly bad between every situation, I was the only common denominator. And so it was very obvious the things that were attributed to, caused by, or heavily related to me. And the first opening, I didn't see it. And the second event, I didn't see it. But by the third time, I was like, okay, this is a completely different country with completely different language and a totally different team and format. And yet this piece of the process is falling apart again. And I am the only thing that's common here. So the process is broken and I'm not a good enough leader to solve for it. And so I found a way. It helped me because every situation was so different. I couldn't start over in every country, in every team. So the word like is used too much by many of us conversationally, but there is a power in the word like, in similar to, where I had to find some familiar circumstance that inspired me to feel confident enough to make a decision in an environment that was completely unfamiliar. So I'd be like, this situation of these employees not listening is like when this happened with my sisters, or like when, so I just, because I was so young and I had limited experience in a vertical, I had to draw horizontally on experiences and find commonality and inspiration. Just my data bank was very small, very limited. And when I was opening these stores around the world, we had beepers, not cell phones. And so it's not like I could just Google what to do in this situation. And even if I could, it had to be immediately applied to humans with some level of expertise. So the only way for me to have some confidence in a new decision, a first time experience, was to draw on what seemed like other similar situations or experiences. And I started using analogies a lot in my speaking. So if I was sitting down mentoring a manager and they had all these ideas, I would say, think of a kite or a balloon. I had to think of universal concepts. You want to have a balloon, you want to be floating around up here, but you have to be tethered to the ground. Otherwise, you will fly away. And so very simple, almost visual reframing of a situation helped me and other people depersonalize it a bit and see it for something that was a bit more objective and understand the concept and help each of us individually come to our own smartest decision. So I do believe it's a bit nature, but it was those early experiences where I had to lead teams who I'd never met, who had very different cultures and languages, literally in some cases. And so I had to find common ways to describe ways of working or what we were dealing with or how to think about something. So then if they thought about it differently, they could come to their own conclusions. And then I'll say one other thing. The other thing that taught me to think in frameworks and reframing is many different experiences. The more unique experiences I had, the more commonality I saw between them, the more I could draw on these reframing. So if someone would say, I'm struggling with prioritizing, I have limited resources, I don't know the few things to spend my time on, I would tell the story of when I was in Ethiopia and the village leaders were struggling with self-sustaining practices, and they had a lot of people coming in trying to help them. And there were a lot of us who were from the Western world and asking them what their priorities were. And we're like, what's your first priority? And they said water. We need to get water from where it is to where we need it. We need to clean water for drinking, and we need access to it broadly. And a friend of mine said, great, we're going to go back to the US and to the UK, and we're going to raise funds for you. So what's your second priority? What's your third priority? Give us a list, a very American or Western type of thing. And the village leaders were speaking in Amharic, which is one of the oldest spoken languages in the world. So what we said to them and vice versa had to be translated into 2 intermediary languages in order to get back. But their reaction to that question needed no translation. It was laughter. They laughed and they said, our second priority is water. Our third priority is water. Our fourth priority is water. Because if you build us a school and we don't have water, the children will not be in school. If you teach us about hygiene and we don't have access to water, if you teach us about nutrition and we don't have access to water, they were so clear on their priority. And because I was also a business person and a humanitarian, and a leader of other organizations, I remember sitting in this circle in the dirt, listening to them with their hyper clarity on what the one thing, the first thing is that they needed, otherwise nothing else mattered. And I thought, God, it would be so powerful if I had that level of clarity as a leader in what my first thing should be, because everything else after it is either kind of pointless or gets much better if it occurs after this one thing is created or established. And it was like a light bulb. I'm like, what is my water? Like when I go back to my companies and if it seems like we're noodling a bunch of choices, I'm going to ask, what's my water? Thinking of it through the framework of what is the one thing that if I could only do one first, that one thing is going to has the best chance of making the other things better. So that's I think the third piece. It's nature. It's the experiences of being in unfamiliar environments and having to speak in a way that was a common non-industry specific language. And then it was doing lots of different things in a short amount of time where the patterns that transcended the situation or the industry, the frames, if you will, emerged.
That's fascinating. And I feel like for every question that I ask you, you have a framework. There's a framework for that. There's a framework for that. And so the other question that I had for you in that same line of question is can you tell us about the Hotshot rule and how you became, your own coach?
Yeah. So when I was kind of up and coming executive at Hooters, I did have people who were very kind to me. I had leaders who believed in me. Obviously, I was in leadership roles at a very young age. So clearly I had people who gave me a shot. But I didn't have a lot of outside mentors. And I kept hearing about mentors and how you should have mentors and people who are, with you on your journey. But working at Hooters, it's not like I had all these fabulous people beating down the door, lining up to help me with my career. It was sort of a isolated environment. So I had to learn how to be my own best self coach. I still wanted to grow. I still needed to improve. I still needed perspective. But I realized there were two ways to do that. One way is to check in with other people, find mentors or find mentoring moments. The other way is to use my own mind to think about what others might do if they were in my situation. And as I started having success as a leader, I realized I was blinded by my own progress. And I was leading a team once, and one of my executives kept telling me I needed to address this problem in the business. And I kept telling her, it's not that big of a deal. Because in my mind, relative to the shitstorm I dealt with years ago, it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, in the scheme of the worst that I've seen, this is just not that bad. And so I don't think I should go kick these guys out. It was about addressing a franchisee and getting them out of the system. And she looked at me and she said, it might not be as bad as the worst that you've seen, but it is the worst today and it must be handled. And she was new and she saw it with such clear eyes. Like, the problem was so clear to her because she just looked at the world as it is with no, what I call, progress filter. I have a progress filter. I see the world through the lens of how it has improved. I see my company as how much better it is today. It is the best it's ever been. But because it was her first day, it was the worst it will ever be. And I was collided. It was colliding. Like, I'm like, this is the best it's ever been. And she's like, it sucks. This is the worst it'll ever be. That's why you hired me. And so I really appreciated that day one fresh eyes perspective that gets more difficult as we have success because we're blinded by our own progress. So I thought, how do I cut through that and make sure I don't get complacent? And it doesn't mean I'm not successful. It means I'm missing the edge that a new person, a hotshot, would see on their first day. So the exercise is simply this. I used to do it once a quarter, and then it was so easy and effective once a month. And now I do it every Sunday when my kids are at their common nap time. And it takes not even 5 minutes, so fast. So I just pause, get in a quiet space, and I think about my role. My role as leader, my role as mother, my role as wife, whatever I want to improve. And usually it's my professional role. But at least once a month, I think about my role as a wife and a mother because I want to improve in that area as well. So I think of my role, president, COO, focus brands. Step one. Step two, I envision a hotshot, a badass, like a Mr. or Mrs. Potato Head of badassery. All of you genetically modified into one human or one of you. And the trick about identifying the hotshot is it's not to intimidate me. It's not someone that when I think of, it makes me feel like shit because I'm not good enough. It's someone that I admire or I respect or I appreciate. So that's step two. So I think of my role. Step two, I think of the hotshot. Step three, I envision that hotshot taking over my job tomorrow. So you, Erica, literally take over Focus Brands tomorrow. So that's the third. I envision you there. Like I'm actually picturing you leading my team. And then I ask myself, step four, what is one thing, only one, and the very first thing that Erica would do differently to make the company better? And what's funny is when I visualize you in the role with the little bit I know about you, I come up with something. I can think of something immediately that you would be like, wow, I can't believe Kat let that be that way. We're totally going to change that. Like, this is the area I'm going to focus on day one as a leader. And then I ask myself, if I know that that's what Erica would do, and I respect Erica, and it clearly identifies an area of the business to be addressed, why can't that be me? The next step is I take action on that thing in 24 hours. Action. I hire the person, I fire the person, I address the issue, I make the sales call, I implement the technology, whatever it is, I do it. Then I sit down or on Zoom or call my team or whoever the stakeholders are in that role. If it's my husband, I tell my husband. I practice my weekly Hotshot rule. I realize this is one thing in the business that if I were brand new, if I were you, if you were me, that it should be addressed, and I did X. I don't sit down with the team and say, I thought about this. What do you think? I thought about it. I recognized I could do better. I took action on it. I want you to know. And the pattern of that behavior says, I'm always reflective. I'm always on a journey to improve. I'm vulnerable enough to continually tell you something. I recognize that there was something I could do better, and I'm action oriented enough to take action on it. And one, that's a powerful culture to build in a company, that I'm constantly on my own thinking about what I can do better, which also then, by the way, invites people to bring ideas for progress and criticism. And it's this combination, it's another framework of my 4 mindsets, but this combination of humility and curiosity on one side, but courage and confidence on the other. I am confident enough in my own skin to admit that I am never doing all things as best as they can be done. And I am comfortable enough in my own skin and in my role to think about and be inspired by how someone else might do it, and to take action when being colored by the idea of their thinking. And so I'm humble and curious, but I'm courageous and confident. And almost every time I meet with my team or my husband or whoever the stakeholders are, to just say, hey, and I make it sound like it's this big formal meeting. It's not. It's just conversations like, hey, I did the Hotshot rule. Sometimes I don't even use the word Hotshot rule. I was thinking, I realized this is something I need to do. I did it. Almost every time someone says, what took you so long? Almost every time. Because the people who are closer to the action see me objectively, and they're closer to the business, and they know what the right thing to do is before the leader makes the decision. Always. The trick is just compressing the time between when people who are doing most of the work see it and the leaders who make the decision can see it and then act on it. Because people who are closest to the action don't have the language to articulate the problem or the solution, and they don't have the authority that the leader does to do something about it. And so that Hotshot rule is basically a self-coaching exercise, but it's the framework, it's the muscle of asking questions, answering them, and acting on them. Like ask, answer, act, ask, answer, act. And so I just get a little bit better at something every week. And in the process, I'm training my team that it is not only okay, but expected to be vulnerable, to be open, to be on a journey of progress, and that we're never done learning. And by the way, this rule has like helped me save millions and millions of dollars and avoid pitfalls and remove bad apples from the company, and inspired me to invest in technologies. Like the outcome of it can be quite profound, even though it seems like a very small, simple exercise.
That's super, super inspiring. And don't worry, Kat, I'll never come for your job. We're going to shift gears a little bit. I'm going to take a question from the audience. And so Arpit, you asked a very nice question on the Slack channel. Would you mind unmuting and asking it to Kat?
Yeah, totally. So Kat, so we have some fellows that I think are definitely exploring some different ideas, kind of in the food space, restaurant space, but like even taking a step back, would love kind of your opinion on, right, like 2020 with some pandemic, a lot of restaurants are shutting down, restaurants are adapting to kind of outdoor dining, people have kind of renewed interest in kind of cooking more at home. I also feel like there's other trends around kind of healthy cooking, more focus on food, but how do you see kind of the systemic changes, even from the perspective of your organization, but just kind of what are some of the opportunities that we should be thinking about to take advantage of these broad changes?
Yeah. Most of the macro trends that you're referencing were happening far before the pandemic, right? I'm sure you've heard this, and some of you may say it yourself, they just got accelerated. There is only one macro trend that is actually new because of the pandemic. And it is the consumer intentional focus and concern on health and safety. That is new, right? We all felt comfortable going into restaurants. We assumed, I mean, especially in North America and developed countries, there are whole government infrastructure systems to monitor food safety and practices. That's not new for restaurants. So we all as consumers had a embedded level of assumption of well-being and food safe practices that made us psychologically comfortable with eating in restaurants and ordering food. The only macro trend that's new is this, like, is it safe, right? That is new. And there's so much opportunity from a business perspective in that, because I do not believe consumers go backward. Yes, some will get comfortable again, but if you think about belief systems as a floor, like the least that people expect, and then it goes up to some level of those who are particularly interested in an area, the floor got raised. Like the least that people expect before was, wash your hands, don't sneeze on my food, wear gloves, right? Now it's moving to, do you have filtration systems in your HVAC units that kill viruses and bacteria? Do you have the UV lights that do the same thing? Do you have hand sanitizers? Do you have these other practices? How do I know as a consumer? How do I trust that as like, there is so much commercial opportunity for restaurants that is actually not hard to find, because many of these systems and processes have been in places like hospitals, and other high risk environments. There is like a mind-blowing. I was just on the phone with the CEO of the National Restaurant Association, like the largest advocacy group in Washington, D.C., lobbying on the Hill. And he's like, what should we be focused on? I'm like, dude, you guys need to be putting out research on it. Really, what does it take to be safe in a restaurant and to handle food? What doesn't travel? You need to be advocating for the technologies. You need to be helping restaurant companies, because it's such a fragmented industry, finding these technologies. Like, it is massive. I mean, decades ago, you didn't have to used to have hoods over your ovens, right? It was, some restaurateurs did it because it made the environment less smoky and clear. And then, so leaders did it optionally. And then followers did it because customers started going only to the restaurants with the fresh, clean air environment. And then eventually it became mandatory and then regulated. So think of that as what is to come for what else we might be very early in the curve with what'll start out as optional that leaders in the industry will put in place in restaurants that could eventually become mandatory and regulated. It's a long view, but I would call everyone's attention to a macro trend that is slightly less obvious, but when I say it, it's like, oh yeah, that's real. And it's brand new, which means early in the curve, huge white space, massive opportunity. So I'll set that, and by the way, that applies to hotels and any business that is putting people in a box. So huge, massive opportunity. Set that aside, and I'll go to these other converging trends that you mentioned. Of course, right now, because of the radical acceleration of these trends, those of us that have been paying attention to the other ones, the shift away from malls to a degree, e-commerce, apps and loyalty, delivery, off-premise, pickup, that's not new. Like, the brands that were paying attention have been putting that stuff in place for 5 to 7 years. But it accelerated radically. And so anyone who wasn't on that journey is toast, unless they get some type of financial help to do it. So that means there will be a certain amount of carnage in the industry that is unpreventable. It is imminent, and it will be spread out throughout sectors, verticals. Of course, you've got fine dining, casual dining. You also just have fast casual chains that weren't prepared from an off-premise standpoint and didn't have enough capital to bridge them to when they could get there. And so scale, being a bigger chain or franchise, is really an advantage at a time like this, because we can wrap our infrastructure arms around the small business owners and help them stay alive while they and we figure things out if we weren't already on that journey. Any business with drive-thrus is crushing it right now. We have 2 brands that are majority drive-through, and they are far positive year over year COVID sales. So, and we were already moving to more drive-thrus, even to non-fast, non-drive-through concepts, because convenience it is the convenience economy, parallel pathing the experience economy. But the convenience economy, the pandemic caused the convenience economy to take over 75% of what was the experience economy, right? You had the convenience economy and experience economy, and they were bifurcating. Like, you were either hyper convenient or it's a super worth it convenience or experience to go. So you either spend a lot of money or a little bit of money. It's really fast, or it's long, but I get it and I want it to be long and protracted. Now it's almost all the convenience economy, driven by the concern for safety, in addition to people just still wanting things to be fast. And so delivery, so take drive-through, set that aside, convenience through the car, but not all real estate has access to drive-through. So real estate assets for restaurants that don't are putting in pickup windows to give a drive-through like experience. So think about all the technologies and all the things that get affected by having used to ordered inside, but now going to a pickup window, the operational changes that have to happen and the technological things that have to be in place. Then there's order at the table. So order on my app, but put in, I'm here, and instead of I'm here in the parking lot for curbside, I'm here at table 55, bring me my food. So I can just sit down with my kids and I don't have to stand with them in line and be worried about them touching everything. So apps and their functionality and the complexity of what were pretty simple white label apps now has to level up a couple notches in order to capture all the revenue potential and the convenience demands of consumers being shaped by Starbucks, Domino's, major players that invested in convenience, speed, and technology far before it was commonplace, expected, or cool. And now with the pandemic, an older generation is now expecting this. So it's no longer coastal cities, coastal elites, younger people, Gen Z. It's everyone, it's everywhere. The trouble when you move to the delivery side of it, as I'm sure you know, is the economics of it all. The delivery companies aren't profitable in most cases. The restaurateurs are far less profitable because there's a lot of margin compression with the commission rates they pay the delivery companies. And even the consumer experience is getting super clunky with delivery companies, where it said 20 minutes, but it's actually 50, and then, oh shit, they canceled my order, right? So there's still a lot of opportunity in what feels like a crowded tech space to smooth out the customer experience and improve pieces of it in a profitable way. The challenge is lots of incumbents are jumping in. Google is getting in big time into Google Food, Google menu ordering, which is competing with the front end marketplace side of Uber Eats and DoorDash and Postmates. And so people are going, well, I'll use Google Food because Google ordering, because it's better and a lower commission rate than using the marketplaces of Uber Eats or DoorDash or Postmates. And then I'll just use one of these third-party companies for only their last mile logistics side of the business, Dash Drive, all of these things, to cobble together other sources for a complete end-to-end value chain experience while bringing 2 or 3 points of profitability back to my bottom line. So this fight of marketplace and back-end logistics is just going to keep happening, but right now it is crushing the restaurant's economics. And with their sales depressed, these are the non-drive-through concepts I'm talking about, with their top line depressed, margin compression gets them much closer to break even. It makes them very nervous. And then you just have a great real estate reckoning coming. There is a real estate reckoning that is coming. People are bailing on their leases. You're not going to even see it or hear about it until January, because everybody's trying to make it through the holidays to negotiate and see what happens. So lots of both death of businesses and lots of opportunity for how might some of this real estate be repurposed. What are the systems that are going to map the real estate availability? Who are the big players with the REITs that help them think about repurposing using data for supply-demand gaps in an area? Like, oh, did you know in your community you have more searches for this then you have demand, you can go open this there. So the restaurant evolution that's being accelerated, that will create certain depth and some really great opportunity for those who are optimized for convenience, is also going to create a big set of business opportunities in real estate. And then on your health question, same thing, right? People still want, they do want healthy and more and more healthy over time, but people still want to indulge. So there's still a lot of room for candy and treats and sweets. I mean, Cinnabon is still wildly successful, and it is the poster child for sugar and fat and carbs. But it's so honest about what it is. It's not trying to be what it's not. And literally the brand says things like, when you want to be bad, this is so worth it. It's acknowledging that it is not good for you. It is a treat and an indulgence. Our average frequency is 1.5 times a year. In general, I would say that's not very good for business, for food, but it works because of where we're located. Malls, airports, and yes, that's changing a bit as malls close, and I'm happy to answer questions about that. But there's still a huge market for indulgence, but the brand, the honesty, and the deliciousness. Like, I see all these people launching cookie companies, and they send them to me, and I'm like, your cookie is in a beautiful package, but it tastes like shit. And it's hard, and it's not delicious. And even if it's good for you, there are people figuring out how to do good for you in a delicious way. And so the cutting through the clutter and being worth it, like, if people are kind of like, if I want to be bad, I'm going to go get something that's objectively delicious. And if I want to be healthy, I'm going to go do something that is obviously healthy. A smoothie, a bowl, nutrients, supplements, doing these things that are like the hybrid and compromising on both. It's not that there's a market for it, but it gets harder to turn it into a big scalable business if it's not winning on enough certain attributes.
Amazing. So the people in the chat just woke up. We have a bunch of questions and about 15 minutes left. Let's try to make their last 15 minutes kind of rapid fire. Connor, you want to take it away?
Sure. Hi, Kat. Thanks for doing this talk. I was wondering your thoughts on cloud kitchens, and then also the opportunity for local restaurateurs or even small chains to launch kind of virtual brands or multiple brands out of their current location.
Yeah, it's obviously fun to talk about. There's a lot of news. There's not a lot of traction in the US. I mean, there is, but relative to what I would consider scale, it's very slow in the US. And when Cloud Kitchens, and I'm very close to it, I've worked with these guys, all of them, Cloud Kitchens, Kitchen United, all the one-offs, as you can imagine, we, as a major player, we are deep in this boat. What those cloud kitchen concepts require is density. You've got to have short delivery routes for a high number of deliveries so that the cost of delivery comes down for the consumer, so that the top line revenue stream of a delivery only business is enough to afford the economics that Cloud Kitchens and Kitchen United are putting together. And the reality is, both, like Travis and Diego and their team with Cloud Kitchens, started out with a super affordable model because he's owning the real estate. He's like, we're using my money. I don't have these like impatient investors. I can wait. But very quickly, they started charging more. And now when you net it out, they're charging the same as Kitchen United. And in most cities, which are not Manhattan, which are not the densest part of the Bay Area, in most cities, that delivery only revenue is not enough to support $9,000 a month in operating costs. It's not enough. Like, you've got to do 500, 600, 700,000 a year. And most of these brands, their delivery only business is half of that at best, like in Manhattan. Now, of course, there are exceptions, right? But I'm talking about the broader industry. So in places like China, Cloud Kitchens are brilliant, right? You have the density in these large cities. The cost of delivery is close to zero. You're talking 15-minute delivery times. They'll do 20 deliveries in a single building. It is efficient. You can batch. It's effective. So Cloud Kitchens are brilliant. It just, people have to understand the underbelly to understand where it has more traction and why. and think about the economics that way. So that's cloud kitchen. So I love it. I'm a huge fan. It is blowing up around the world, much slower, and all the energy people are here. Like, yes, Chick-fil-A has a couple cloud kitchens because Chick-fil-A is a monster of a business and they don't have enough capacity in their locations to fulfill their demand. That is not the case with most restaurant brands. It's just not. And now that volume is slower in brick and mortar, the average restaurant can use itself as a cloud kitchen. Like, you have the capacity. The question is the real estate optimal? The beauty of cloud kitchens and Kitchen United is the data they have that says I'm plopping a pin in real estate that is right in the middle of optimal delivery demand. And that is what the average restaurateur, of course, does not have. So that's what I think about cloud kitchens. I'm a huge fan. It's just going to take longer to be like a big common thing in the US. Virtual brands, virtual concepts, I think it's super smart. But it doesn't, just like cloud kitchens, it doesn't apply to all places in all things. So I know some restaurateurs that have existing brick and mortar restaurants. Let's just say they're a chicken wing restaurant and they always had burgers and fries on their menu. And they're called Bubba's Chicken Wings, but their burgers and fries are really good, but it's not in their name. And it's like just something people kind of get sometimes. And then they launched Judy's Burgers as a virtual concept out of their location. And they only sell burgers and fries online on Uber Eats, and they developed an app, right? And it added 10% of sales to that business. So it makes a lot of sense if someone can manage the brand, manage the menu, and not have concerning, confusing consumer optics if deliveries are coming from that location, because people still do give a shit about brand. Like they actually do care about brand. But we're in a season where all of this is so new that you'll see it keep growing. Like, you have no idea if the Chinese that you're ordering is out of an existing restaurant that does something else, or it's someone's kitchen, or it's a chef in a commercial kitchen, because you can kind of call it whatever you want on here, which I think is super dope. Like, it's democratizing access to creators and cooks and chefs, which is a bridge to your other question. I think it's awesome. There's a ceiling on how much that revenue can be before you have to scale and eventually get your own space for production. And then you end up kind of being like the other restaurant. So, you know what I mean? It's like a cycle. Like, it's going to make a lot of sense for people at a certain size. And then they're going to need their own space. And then you're like, oh shit, I got to pay for my own real estate again. And if I'm going to do delivery, should I open a window so customers can come up, because I need that revenue? And you slowly, it'll be cyclical. You know, they'll be only virtual and cloud. And then they'll be like, well, why would I not let customers walk up? I'm going to do a walk-up window. And then why would I not let them sit down? I'm going to put some tables out there, you know, and then it leads you to eventually what looks like today's restaurants, but they started as virtual. So I think that's a really interesting part of the journey. We're also seeing a ton of startups trying to help home cooks legally sell out of their business. Josephine, I don't know if any of you know of Josephine, that was in the Bay Area, that took a big run at this and ran into regulatory problems from the health departments. That is the single greatest barrier to doing that, to creating a marketplace for home chefs or home cooks or out of work chefs that have lost their job but are brilliant if they have commercial kitchen and access to front end revenue drivers. So exciting space, but I would encourage people to be careful about how big the market is in certain areas.
Yeah, that's so true. We had a portfolio company at my previous company that did that, allowed, you know, individuals to sell, chefs to sell their cooking to other individuals, and the same story, ran into regulatory issues. Kenny, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks. Great talk so far. I'm actually going to ask a different question than what I posted, because I think it's super relevant to your background, Kat. I advise a brand that's like kind of similar to the space that Cinnabon is in. They do like popcorn, and they have a bunch of retail locations, and also they do some. It has been hitting them pretty hard, and they've been looking at different distribution channels. I'm wondering if you saw like if some channels work better than others for the type of like food product you were talking about, the comfort food product that could be that's can be still delivered in like a healthy way. But yeah, like, oh, like I'm just curious, like which channels you saw like the best engagement in, and then like once you reach saturation for Cinnabon, like were there any other growth strategies you employed, like trying to go through supermarkets or trying to do direct to consumer for make an online brand out of it? Like, did any of those things pan out?
Yeah, so I'll start with the end first, and you broke up a little bit in your question. So if my answer is a little bit off, just redirect me. In terms of
Yeah,
the
sure.
brand, what I was talking about at the beginning, I'm not sure if you were on, literally is that playbook that you just asked about. So Cinnabon still has not met saturation. It's only in a third of Cinnabon locations are in malls. But when I took over the brand, the way we turned it around was not only addressing the unit level economics and the brick and mortar strategy of, yes, growing in the good malls, because Cinnabon's only in like 250 malls, whereas Auntie Anne's is in 1,000, to give you a sense of the difference. But Cinnabon's also in Travel
Right.
Plaza. It's also inside of Schlotsky. So it's in these other venues where the brick and mortar business is not as negatively affected. And so set that aside, but we have over 50 SKUs in grocery of Cinnabon. Some's coffee creamer, some's coffee, some baked goods, because the brand deconstructs incredibly well, because we literally own flavors and ingredients that are unique to us. And so those things can be separated from the thing and put in something else. And so that, like our cinnamon and our frosting, if you think about it that way. So that allows us to have these licensing opportunities where our cinnamon is in things that cinnamon makes sense in, and our frosting is on things. And then we have just our own versions of our baked goods. But I will say in grocery, unlike popcorn, I think popcorn can be very literally translated, although it doesn't have as many extensions of our product as baked dough. Obviously it can go in many directions.
Right.
The products in grocery are very different from what we have in our bakery, because we make the cinnamon rolls from scratch, and they're the size of your face, and we hold them hot. That's why it's so famous. It's like this ooey gooey, aromatic, hot, indulgent experience. It is very unique to that channel. All the products that are in grocery have to be thought of for that supply chain, that purchasing occasion, and then the fact that people are eating it at home. So I would say first, the answer to your question is the question about channels and where it works for celebratory or indulgent products. The first question you have to ask, which is quite functional, is supply chain. Just what is your product? Does it have any supply chain limitations? So I'm sure some of your product does not. It's shelf stable, but maybe if it's chocolate covered, right, then hot climates would be a problem. So you just got to map out what type of supply chain is it going to live in, where is it going to be, how is it going to be held, transported, and merchandised, and make sure you don't have any quality degradation with that. The second, so that it's super boring and not sexy, but foundational to mapping out other channels of revenue. The second is more fun, and it's about brand and how well known is your brand. Because retailers want you to bring people to their category. And so if you're talking about grocery or other restaurants, the reason they put a branded product on their shelf or in their restaurant is because you have some evidence, whether it's through your social following or your brand awareness or your unique customer need for whatever reason that you uniquely meet, that is worth it for them to pay a premium for your boutique branded product, as opposed to something off the shelf from their distribution center that's going to cost them half, quite honestly, and be private label. So this ability to articulate value of brand is how you think about who's going to want you and how you can get the price that you need to make that wholesale, because it's essentially wholesale, right? A seller to a reseller, that wholesale channel work. And our DTC business for Cinnabon is blowing up. It was already doing really well before COVID, where we have people are literally hand rolling, hand baking, cooling, boxing in this gorgeous packaging, real Cinnabon cinnamon rolls that we sell in our franchise business, selling it through our website, cinnabon.com. We fulfilled it on our own at first, and then that was super complicated. And so we partnered with Harry and David to be our fulfillment engine, because they are the best at this for indulgent products. So also know when to rent, build, or buy a capability. And we built our own capability and decided that's not our core capability, and it's very distracting for us, and we're not great at it. So we're going to rent the capability by partnering with Harry and David. So we sell our product through our website. They sell our product through their website, but they handle all of the fulfillment and the management of inventory. So all we have to do is build the brand, make sure the product is made properly, and then sell it and send love to our fans. So as you think about, DTC, your manufacturing partners, your fulfillment channels, who else sells for occasions that product might be right for? Those are some things I would think about.
Right. That all makes perfect sense. I think the manufacturing was in-house. The manufacturing is in-house, and I think we were looking at going D2C to start. That way we could control the messaging around the branding and build the branding up a bit more. It's been very popular in the tri-state area. But I was just curious it sounds like it was more of like you did both well, just different playbooks for each.
Yeah, I mean, licensing was first, like getting the grocery, co-manufacturing the products, getting them into grocery. That came far before DTC. Mm-hmm. And the direct-to-consumer, I mean, all our CPG products you can buy on Amazon, on those groceries. Like technically all our CPG products are, quote, direct-to-consumer through those marketplaces, but our native DTC.
That's
that did not start until 2.5 years ago. Just because we believed we were able to put a business case together that would say, we could be good at it and it would make sense because there's so much unmet demand. We don't need it to build the brand because the brand has crazy awareness, but we need to meet demand. And so it was one more channel that helped us close that supply demand gap.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think
I'm going to interject here. Thank you, Kenny, for your question, just because we're at the top of the hour and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Kat, where can people learn more about your amazing knowledge about all these things and your frameworks?
I share a lot on my newsletter called Checking In, typical Substack. So just look for Kat Cole or Checking In, and I'm building a kind of an archive of a lot of my frameworks. Sending stuff out free for subscribers every week. And then I do like deep cuts for people who want the deeper dive with paid subscription. LinkedIn, I share a lot of posts there. I'm available in all the socials too. So Twitter, my DMs are open. But a lot of my frameworks and thinking are shared there. And I probably do, 2 or 3 podcasts a week, just sharing with friends of mine who start podcasts. To just share lessons and have the discussions around different angles and different lenses of leadership, business, brand, and operations.
Awesome. So sorry, everybody who didn't get to ask their question, but as you know, Kat is very open. So feel free to reach out to her. Thank you, Kat, so much for accepting this invitation. We need to have you back because this conversation, I feel like we could have gone on for another hour.
Go on and on. Anytime, seriously. I love jamming with smart people doing cool things. So congratulations to all of you. And if I can be helpful, let me know.
Perfect. Well, thanks everybody for joining us tonight, and see you soon.
Thank you all.